Story 1. Disappearing without a trace. Mark Collins was a famous architect in the small town of Silver Spring. It seemed like he had the perfect life: a loving wife, Anna, a smart son, Alex, a cozy home, and a successful career. His current project, the renovation of the old Winchester mansion, was supposed to be the pinnacle of his work. But the house was notorious. Decades ago, a family had lived there, and they had mysteriously disappeared. Locals believed it was cursed, and Mark himself did not believe the rumors at first. But the more he delved into his work, the more his life began to fill with inexplicable events. The first time things started to go wrong was when Mark noticed that his things had been moved around in his office. He assumed that his son was behind the scenes, but he insisted that he hadn't been there. Then came calls from unknown numbers. Mark picked up the phone and heard only quiet, barely audible whispers, as if someone was trying to tell him something but couldn't. Notes with strange symbols and phrases like, "They're watching you," or "You can't escape," began to appear in his car, at home, in the office. Mark attributed it to someone's joke or his own fatigue. However, one evening, returning from work, he noticed a shadow behind him. It seemed that someone or something was following him, but as soon as Mark stopped and looked back, the shadow disappeared. One evening, Mark decided to go for a run, as he did almost every day. Anna was cooking dinner, and they agreed to have dinner together, but Mark did not return. At first, Anna was not worried, but after several hours of waiting, when he did not answer the phone, she began to panic. She called the police, and they began a search. Soon they found his sneaker, the only one, lying on the side of the road. His phone was lying nearby, its screen showing missed calls from unknown numbers. There were strange marks at the scene, as if someone had been struggling. There were scratches on the ground and a few drops of blood, but Mark was nowhere to be found. The detectives couldn't figure out what had happened, and Anna found it hard to believe that this could have happened to her husband, who was such a calm and sensible man. When the police failed to provide any answers, Anna hired a private detective, an old family friend, John River. He was a man with a wealth of experience and a unique sense for strange things. Together with Anna, they began to investigate Mark's life, trying to find at least some clues. It soon became clear that Mark was leading a double life. His notes, found in a secret drawer of his desk, contained many references to a secret club of explorers who were fascinated by abandoned and mysterious places in the area. John and Anna found out that Mark was obsessed with the Winchester mansion and its history. He began visiting the place alone at night, studying old documents and notes from previous owners. The mansion contained strange rooms with portraits of people who had once disappeared. Mark's notes contained many references to certain rituals and symbols that were associated with opening a portal to another world. The Winchester mansion was built on a site that was considered cursed in ancient times. It was said that disappearance rituals were performed there, using some mystical symbols to open a portal to a parallel dimension. Mark was fascinated by this story and was eager to unravel the mystery. The deeper he delved, the more he realized that something was watching him. She and John found a hidden room in the Collins house where Mark kept his research. On the walls were maps of disappearances around town, notes about a cult that once operated in Silver Spring, and photographs of people who had disappeared in the area. Among the papers, Anna came across one note that read, "We discovered the way. He came for us." Following this clue, Anna and John went to the mansion. Already on the approach, strange things began to happen. Cars stalled, phones lost connection. Inside the house, it was even creepier. Footsteps echoed in the empty corridors. Doors slammed by themselves, whispers came from dark corners. They discovered a hidden basement where an ancient altar stood. On it lay photographs of all the missing, including Mark. There was a chill in the air, and in the darkness of the basement, a figure suddenly began to appear. It was Mark, but he looked different than before. His body was broken, and his eyes were empty. It was as if he was trying to say something, but he could not. Anna tried to get to him, but at that moment everything plunged into darkness, and she lost consciousness. When Anna woke up, she found herself on the street at dawn, and John was missing. The police found her, but no one believed her stories. They wrote it off as a nervous breakdown and fatigue. Anna was forced to accept the version that it was her imagination, although she knew that she had seen Mark and that he was stuck somewhere between worlds. A few days later, Anna received a package. It contained a piece of paper with Mark's handwriting and the words, "I'm still here, don't give up." This was proof that Mark was alive, albeit in another dimension. Anna decided to continue her search, now alone, convinced that her husband was trapped in another world. The story leaves a feeling of incompleteness and uncertainty, making you wonder how thin the line between reality and the unknown is, and that perhaps Anna's love and perseverance can bring Mark back, if only she can unravel all the secrets of the cursed mansion. Story 2. Lost Expeditions. In 1845, British explorer Sir John Franklin set out on his fateful final voyage with the ambitious goal of finding a northwest passage that would connect the Atlantic and Pacific Oceans through the icy expanses of the Canadian Arctic. The expedition consisted of 2 ships, the Erebus and the Terror, which were equipped with the latest technology of the time. They had steam engines, reinforced hulls to protect against ice, and huge stores of food and provisions that would sustain the crew of 129 for 3 years of sailing. The ships were also equipped with libraries, musical instruments, and even a bathhouse to boost the crew's morale. Initially, the expedition went according to plan. Erebus and Terror successfully left England in May 1845 and arrived in Greenland a few months later, where the last contact was made with whalers who had seen the ships sailing northwest. After that, there was a long, eerie silence. The disappearance of Franklin's expedition became one of the great mysteries of the century. When the ships failed to return on schedule, panic set in Britain, and the government organized several search expeditions to find out what had happened to the missing. The first significant clue came in 1850, when a search party came across Franklin's campsite on Beechy Island. There they found 3 crudely dug graves containing the crew, likely the first victims of disease and the harsh Arctic conditions. The bodies were remarkably well preserved in the permafrost, and studies later showed that the sailors were suffering from pneumonia and tuberculosis, as well as lead poisoning, likely from the poorly sealed tins the crew ate. The search continued, but the true horrors and scale of the disaster were revealed only years later. In 1854, explorer John Ray, working for the Hudson's Bay Company, met Eskimos, Inuits, who told him about white people who had died of starvation west of King William Island. They showed him artifacts, silver spoons, compasses, which had belonged to Franklin's sailors. But the most shocking thing was that the Eskimos claimed to have seen signs of cannibalism among the dying crew members. Ray found remains with obvious signs of butchering, which confirmed the stories. This information caused a public outcry and shock in Victorian England. Suggestions of cannibalism among the heroic explorers were perceived as blasphemy. A few years later, in 1859, the most important piece of evidence was found. A document sealed in a stone cairn on King William Island, dated April 1848. It briefly described the events of the expedition. The ships became trapped in ice in September 1846 and remained there for 2 years before being abandoned. John Franklin died on June 11, 1847, and Captain Francis Crozier assumed command. The remaining 105 crew members made a desperate decision to walk south, hoping to find help on the Canadian mainland. The march across the icy wastes was agony. Weakened by disease, hunger, and cold, the men tried to drag heavy sleds loaded with provisions and personal belongings across the ice. Many died along the way, their bodies found later, frozen in strange positions, their empty gazes staring into the endless icy distance. Some held pieces of meat in their hands, probably taken from dead comrades, a last desperate means of survival. Many search expeditions continued for decades after Franklin's crew was officially acknowledged to have perished. In the 1980s, exhumations of remains on Beechy Island revealed high levels of lead in the sailors' bones, which explained the crew's strange behavior and cannibalism. Lead poisoning could cause hallucinations, disorientation, and paranoia. But mysteries remain. Why did the sailors sled heavy objects like books and silverware when they were in danger of dying from starvation and exposure?
And finally, after almost 170 years, in 2014 and 2016, Canadian researchers found both ships. Erebus was found at a depth of 11 meters in King William Sound, and Terror at a depth of 24 meters in Terror Bay. The discovery of these ships was a sensation. Both vessels lay almost untouched, with amazingly preserved details, including dishes, personal belongings of sailors, and even paper documents. Research showed that Terror was in excellent condition, which indicates that the crew did not abandon it immediately and, perhaps, tried to hide from the ice captivity until the last. The story of Franklin's expedition remains one of the darkest and most mysterious pages in the history of Arctic exploration. It reminds us of the fragility of human will in the face of nature, and how easily even the most carefully prepared plans can collapse before the merciless power of the Arctic. The mysteries of their disappearance still haunt minds, leaving unanswered questions. What really happened in the last days of the expedition? And what horrors did these people have to endure before the icy wasteland took their lives? The eternal ice of the Arctic holds its secrets, and the quiet waters around the remains of the Erebus and Terror forever hang like a frozen shadow over the fate of the people who tried to conquer this merciless land. Story 3: Unsolved Murders. The story of the murder of the Dupree family in a small town in Louisiana in 1986 has become one of the most horrific and mysterious unsolved crimes. It was a quiet summer when the family of four, parents Michael and Sarah and two children, 12-year-old Thomas and 8-year-old Emily, were enjoying a vacation at their country home. The Dupree house was located on the edge of the woods, far from any other house, which gave it privacy and charm, but also created the perfect conditions for a tragedy that shocked the entire town. It all started when a local postman noticed that letters and newspapers were starting to pile up outside the Dupree home. He didn't pay much attention at first, but when 5 days passed and nothing had changed, he called the police, thinking that the family might have left in a hurry or that something was wrong. The police arrived and immediately noticed that the doors were locked and the windows were tightly curtained, as if someone was trying to hide what was going on inside. When the police forced the door open, they found a horrific scene. All members of the family had been murdered with horrific brutality. Their bodies were scattered around the house in strange positions, as if they had been caught unawares. Michael and Sarah were found in the living room, with multiple stab wounds. Michael's body was lying by the window as if he had been trying to escape, and Sarah was found by the door, clutching the hilt of a knife, as if in a desperate attempt to defend herself. Thomas and Emily were found in their beds on the second floor. Thomas was lying under a blanket as if he was sleeping, but his face was distorted with terror. Emily was found in the corner of her room, clutching a teddy bear, her eyes wide open, her expression forever etched in the moment of fear. Investigators determined that the murders had occurred at night. There were no signs of forced entry in the house. The windows and doors were locked from the inside. The locks were intact, which suggested that the killer was either known to the family or had somehow entered the house without leaving a trace. None of the neighbors heard any noise, screams, or sounds of a struggle. The only clue found at the scene was a mysterious inscription on the living room wall written in blood, "They are watching." No one knew who they were or what the inscription could mean. On the kitchen table, they found an unfinished cup of tea and a plate with half-eaten food, as if someone had interrupted the family dinner. The police searched the entire house, but found nothing that could shed light on the identity of the killer. Fingerprints were smudged. No footprints or other people's presence were found. It looked as if the killer moved around the house without touching the floor, like a ghost. The police questioned all the neighbors, friends, and acquaintances, but no one noticed anything suspicious. The Dupree family was known to be close-knit and quiet. They had no enemies, debts, or any problems that could have become a motive for such a brutal murder. As the investigation progressed, it became clear that the police had no suspects. Every clue led to a dead end. All the clues and traces that could point to the killer seemed to vanish into thin air. The writing on the wall was analyzed, hoping to find a match to the handwriting, but to no avail. The knife used to commit the murders was also not found. There was no logical explanation for how a person could have gotten in and out of the house without leaving a single print or trace. A few weeks after the murder, when it seemed the case had finally stalled, something even stranger happened. The detective working on the case received an anonymous letter. It said, "You're looking in the wrong place. They're nearby." The letter contained no other details, and its sender was never found. The paper was plain, unmarked. There were no fingerprints, and the text was typewritten, making further investigations more difficult. The Dupree family case was shrouded in darkness and fear. Over the years, as the town began to forget about the incident, rumors about the house began to grow. It was said that sometimes at night, quiet footsteps and whispers could be heard from the house, that doors would open by themselves and windows would slam as if under the influence of an invisible force. Several families tried to live in the house, but they all quickly moved out, claiming that it was impossible to live there due to a strange sense of something evil. No one has ever figured out what happened that night in the Dupree house. Perhaps the killer was a local who managed to hide so well that no one noticed. Perhaps there was something more sinister behind it, something that goes beyond human understanding. The "they are watching" sign remains a chilling reminder that the Dupree family was not alone in their final moments. Decades later, the case remains unsolved. The city archives hold files of investigation materials that no one seems to need anymore. Time has taken the witnesses and memories, but the legend of the Dupree family lives on. The house stands abandoned, overgrown with grass and surrounded by a darkness that even daylight seems unable to dispel. People avoid it, afraid of falling victim to an ancient curse or of being seen again by those who watch. The mystery of their murder remains in the darkness, a reminder that sometimes evil comes without a trace and disappears just as without a trace, leaving behind only a whisper of fear and horror of the unknown.